Imagine you're lost in the woods. You know the trailhead is close, maybe a quarter mile. You've been walking for hours, but logically, rationally, you know safety is right there. And then, you never arrive. Search teams find you days later, barely 100 yards from the road, curled beneath a tree. Alive, no, but so close. This isn't a rare tragedy, it's a pattern. And once you understand why it happens, you'll never look at the wilderness, or the human mind, the same way again. Search and rescue teams across North America have documented a phenomenon so consistent, it has its own name in survival literature. People who are lost, cold, exhausted, or injured will sometimes stop moving when they are agonizingly close to a road, a cabin, or a rescue team. Not because they're giving up, not because they're reckless, but because of something happening deep inside the brain, something that turns competent, intelligent adults into people who can no longer process the world around them correctly. One of the most haunting clues that search and rescue workers encounter is something called paradoxical undressing. Hikers found dead from hypothermia are sometimes discovered with their jackets removed, their gloves off, occasionally their boots unlaced or pulled away. To any outside observer, it looks inexplicable, even suspicious. Why would someone take off their clothes in freezing temperatures? The answer begins not with a decision, but with a biological catastrophe unfolding inside their body. Hypothermia doesn't just make you cold. It dismantles your mind in stages. In the early phase, you shiver violently. That's your body burning energy to generate heat. Your thinking slows. Your fingers become clumsy. But here's where it gets strange. As your core temperature drops below a certain threshold, the blood vessels near your skin, which your body had constricted to protect your core, suddenly relax. Blood rushes back to your extremities, and for a brief, cruel moment, you feel intensely warm enough to believe you're overheating. This isn't a metaphor or an exaggeration. People in late-stage hypothermia report, in the moments before losing consciousness, a burning sensation across their skin. Survivors have described feeling like they were on fire. So they do what anyone on fire would do. They try to cool down. They remove layers. Sometimes they burrow into small spaces, finding shelter in logs or under rocks. This behavior, called terminal burrowing, looks like an animal instinct taking over as the rational brain goes dark. And it explains many of those disturbing discovery scenes. But paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing are just the endpoint of the story. They explain what happens at the very end. The deeper mystery, the one that haunts search and rescue professionals, is what happens in the middle. Why do people make the specific navigational decisions that lead them away from safety in the first place? Why does someone who knows the road is north keep walking south? Why does someone who hears rescuers shouting walk in the opposite direction? The answer involves a phenomenon researchers call negative panic. Negative panic is not what most people imagine when they think of panic. We picture someone sprinting, screaming, making frantic noise. But under certain conditions, particularly cold, exhaustion, and isolation, the human stress response collapses inward. The person becomes withdrawn, passive, almost dreamlike. They stop signaling. They avoid open clearings. They wedge themselves into tight, hidden spaces. They behave in every observable way, as though they are hiding from their rescuers, rather than searching for them. Researchers believe this is an ancient survival response misfiring in a modern context. When a human ancestor was being hunted by a predator, freezing and hiding in a small, concealed space was often the difference between life and death. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a pursuing predator and the crushing anxiety of being lost. So it does what it's always done. It makes you small, still, and hidden. In a world with wolves and bears, that response saved lives. In a forest where helicopters and rescue teams are actively searching for you, it kills. There's a case that survival experts return to again and again. In the Pacific Northwest, experienced outdoorsmen with compasses and maps have been found dead within 1,000 yards of roads or trailheads. Not inexperienced tourists, people who knew the wilderness. What investigators pieced together from their final tracks was a circular pattern. They had at some point been moving towards safety, Then, for no clear reason recorded in the physical evidence, they had turned, and turned again, until their path became a spiral pulling them deeper in. Part of this is a genuine navigational flaw built into human biology. Without external reference points, a sun, a landmark, a sound, humans cannot walk in a straight line. This has been confirmed repeatedly in controlled studies. Blindfolded subjects placed in open fields veer dramatically without realizing it. In a dense forest, where trees block the sky and every direction looks identical, you don't feel yourself curving. You feel like you're going straight. The compass in your mind is broken, and it tells you nothing is wrong. This natural tendency to curve was documented in a fascinating experiment, where subjects were asked to walk through a forest to a point they could see in the distance. Without ongoing visual reference, most participants walked in circles, some completing nearly full loops before stopping, completely convinced they had been walking straight the whole time. The terrifying implication? You can be completely rational, completely determined to walk toward safety, and still end up exactly where you started. Now layer hypothermia on top of this. As your core temperature drops, your visual processing degrades. Your brain begins making errors, seeing patterns where there are none, misreading distances, experiencing a kind of tunnel vision that filters out peripheral information. A highway sign 80 feet to your left becomes invisible because you are no longer processing the edges of your visual field. A search team's orange jackets, glimpsed through the trees, can be dismissed as something else entirely. A strange light, a trick of the fog. There's something even more unsettling that researchers have found. People in the later stages of hypothermia sometimes experience hallucinations. Not wild, cinematic hallucinations, but subtle ones. They see paths that don't exist. They hear voices that direct them deeper into the woods. Some survivors report following what they thought was a fellow hiker, a friend, or a family member, only to realize later there had been no one there at all. The brain, starved of warmth and struggling to maintain function, begins generating its own reality. And here is the mid-story twist that reframes everything. We've been talking about this as though it only happens to unprepared people, to hikers who didn't pack right, or wandered off the trail carelessly. But the documented cases include trained military personnel, experienced mountaineers, police officers and firefighters, people whose profession involves wilderness survival. The conclusion researchers have reluctantly arrived at is that this is not a failure of preparation or intelligence. It is a failure of the body that intelligent preparation cannot fully protect you from. The military has spent considerable resources studying cold weather incapacitation, precisely because of this. Soldiers in Arctic training, people who are physically elite, thoroughly prepared, briefed on the risks, still experience the cognitive collapse of severe cold. The threshold where human judgment becomes dangerously compromised is lower than most people expect. Studies suggest meaningful cognitive impairment can begin at a core body temperature drop of just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. That's a drop your body can reach in conditions that don't even feel that severe. That's the number that makes survival experts pause. You don't need a blizzard. You don't need to be soaking wet in sub-zero temperatures for hours. A cool, rainy evening, exhaustion, and inadequate insulation can get you there. Hypothermia has killed people at temperatures above freezing. It has killed people who thought they were having a bad afternoon, not a life-threatening emergency. The feeling of being uncomfortably cold and the feeling of being dangerously cold are not separated by a dramatic moment of realization. So what actually saves people? What separates the cases with survivors from the cases without? Search and rescue data tells a consistent story. Early signaling is everything. Not running towards sounds, not trusting your sense of direction, not continuing to move when you're exhausted, but staying still, making yourself visible, and making noise. The instinct to keep moving, to trust that your legs will carry you to safety, is one of the most dangerous impulses a lost person can follow. Movement burns the calories your body needs to maintain temperature. Movement in the wrong direction takes you further from help. The 3 rules that search and rescue professionals teach: stay put, stay visible, stay warm, sound almost insultingly simple, but they cut directly against every instinct that fear and cold activate in the human brain. Your terrified, hypothermic mind will scream at you to move, to hide, to fix the problem yourself. Following those 3 rules requires overriding an ancient biological system with a conscious decision. And that's extraordinarily difficult to do when the organ responsible for conscious decisions is the very thing being compromised. There's a reason survival instructors say that the most important survival tool is the one between your ears. But they mean that you need to train it before the emergency happens, not during. The decisions that save lives in the wilderness are made at the trailhead before you leave. Telling someone your route, carrying emergency signaling equipment, knowing the difference between the discomfort of cold and the emergency of hypothermia. Because by the time your body is sending you false warning signals and your mind is conjuring phantom guides through the trees, the window for rational decision-making has already closed. Return for a moment to that image of footprints stopping 20 yards from safety. It's the image that haunts this subject, because it forces a question that's deeply uncomfortable. If someone who was walking toward that light, who had survived the cold this long, who was close enough to smell the wood smoke, if they stopped, if they turned, if they went the other way, it wasn't a failure of will. It wasn't cowardice. Their brain had crossed a threshold where it could no longer correctly interpret the world. The light looked wrong. The direction felt wrong. The signals that should have meant safety were processed as something else entirely. Researchers who study these cases speak carefully about what they call the last coherent decision. There's typically a point in the timeline, reconstructed from physical evidence, from tracker analysis, from the final GPS coordinates of a borrowed device, where the lost person made a choice that looks rational. They moved toward a sound. They found partial shelter. They tried to signal. And then something changed, and the subsequent decisions make no sense to an outside observer. That transition point, from functional to non-functional reasoning, is what scientists are still trying to precisely map and predict. Current research using thermal imaging and cognitive testing in controlled cooling experiments is helping to define exactly how the brain shuts down in stages. What emerges is a picture of a system that doesn't fail all at once. Certain capacities persist long after others have gone. Emotional processing degrades before logical reasoning in some tests. Spatial navigation collapses early. Language processing holds on longer. So a person can still form sentences, still communicate, still feel afraid, while having completely lost the ability to correctly determine which direction to walk. They are conscious, they are trying, but they are working with a broken map. What makes this subject hit differently from other wilderness tragedies is the proximity. We can accept that mountains claim lives. We understand that oceans are dangerous and deserts are unforgiving. But a person dying in a manageable forest within earshot of help, within sightline distance of a road, it seems like there must have been a moment where a different choice could have been made. And that belief, however comforting, is what the science is now quietly, persistently dismantling. The choice was no longer available. The brain that would have made it was already somewhere else. The survival literature has a phrase for this: death by 1,000 subtractions. You don't lose the ability to survive all at once. You lose it incrementally. A degree of core temperature here, a lapse in navigation there, a hallucinated path, a false warmth signal, a turn made for reasons you can no longer explain. Each subtraction seems minor. Together they add up to the 1,000-yard death. And the terrifying part is that you wouldn't know it was happening. The experience from the inside would feel like rational decision-making all the way to the end. So when you hear a story about someone found 100 yards from the trail, or a half-mile from a highway, or 50 feet from a rescue team, resist the instinct to look for the mistake, the recklessness, the thing you would never do. The research suggests the more important question isn't what they did wrong, but what the body does to all of us when it reaches its limits. The wilderness doesn't just challenge your endurance. Under the right conditions, it reaches inside your skull and rearranges the way you see the world, and it does it quietly, and it does it completely, and it does it without your permission. There are survivors of these events, people who were found, people who stayed put, people whose rescue teams reached them in time. Many of them describe the same thing when asked what it felt like. They describe a strange certainty, a feeling, despite everything, that they knew where they were going, that they were handling it. The confidence of the lost is one of the cruelest tricks the cold plays. And perhaps the most important thing any of us can take from these stories is this: the time to learn what your mind does under extreme pressure is not while it's doing it. It's now, while the map still reads correctly, while the compass still points true. The 1,000-yard death is real. It has a science behind it, a biology, a neurology. And buried inside that science is a question worth sitting with. How much of what we call our judgment, our sense of direction, our certainty about where we are and where we're going, how much of that depends on a body that's functioning within a very narrow window of conditions? Take the body outside that window, and the person changes. The question isn't just what happens in a cold forest. The question is what else might quietly reshape the way we see the world, without us ever knowing it's happening.